I'm going to actually introduce Joe to talk a little bit about our artist today. Please join me in welcoming Joe Warner, who led Welcome Artist.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Joe Warner, and I'm the lucky person who gets to help put all these types of things together. This is one of several masterclass series that I have going in collaboration with the legendary Faye Carroll, who we have with us today. Faye Carroll. So we put these series together just to offer something to benefit the community, and it's been so wonderful to see the response over the last couple of years. We have this series going, which has 2 more classes. Next month is Roger Smith of Tower Power, and closing it out is Sylvester Burks in June. And then we have a guitar masterclass series that's going on at the Sound Room. It has 2 classes left. Next month is Bruce Foreman, and then we're closing it in June with Carl Lockett. And we also have a drum masterclass series that's happening at 924 Gilman in Berkeley. And there's a percussion class with the great Jesus Diaz next Saturday. And then we're closing it in May with the legendary David Garibaldi. So make sure to check those out. It's all on my website, joewarnermusic.com or fayecarroll.com. So we want to thank Lisa and Pete Fallico for helping make all this happen. We have an incredible artist with us today. We're so lucky that he said yes, one of the most amazing talents to come out of the Bay Area. And he's going to wow you with what he does. So please welcome the great David Jackson.
Yeah. That was awesome. And again, I did want to speak to it. Being a human, there was a date that I scheduled before this for a recording session, and it was for the entire week. And I mixed up the actual recording day being Friday instead of Saturday, and it was Saturday. So I'm thankful for the kindness and the, generosity to be able to change the date, without taking too much off my head. So sorry if you got some flack for that, but thank you all for showing up today. Again, my name is David Jackson. I'm born and raised here in the Bay Area, Oakland to be specific. And I'm very grateful for my big brother, Dante Taz Roberson on drums. Give him a hand. He's been a mentor to me since I was about 20 years old. Yeah, he's 12. Okay, 12. We're going to say 12 today. So that's going to put us at almost 30 years. So cool, yeah. So happy to have, his support. Again, very grateful for Faye Carroll being here. Just want to get into it about the organ. How many people know about the Hammond organ already? Okay, I got it. Okay, cool. So we got some knowledge. All right. One prime factor that we were discussing earlier about the Hammond organ, and even for what I do, of course, it's very common in church. And I actually did the research to find out that the organ goes back extensively in history, all the way to BC with the pipe organ technology. And that's where we get the electronic tone wheel organ of today, coming from the pipe organ. So I'll get into that later. But for me, the church, what it represents, our faith, and everything that's entailed with that is the sole purpose of why I use my talents to promote and share the love of Jesus Christ with people who I may never get to talk to, but will listen to me play an instrument, because I'm definitely a testament of that love and that grace and the kindness and the blessing. So I literally dedicated my entire life's work for that cause, and Mr. Joe Warner and Miss Faye Carroll have given me a platform at this point to share that gift. So I want to really thank them for that. The time that absolutely. So I'm gonna shut up now and play some more. Kind of modernized, so that was their arrangement of it. Again, big shout out to Dante on drums. So let's get into it. In that song, we had a key change. We started in F, and then we went up to F sharp or G flat. In the church world, it's so interesting. So even though we got C, the regular scale like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, back to C. But when we use the flats and sharps, or the black keys, the end keys are always sharp, and then the rest of the keys are flat. So weird, but it's just how it is. So, for instance, instead of saying like D flat, E flat, we say C sharp, E flat. It's just funny. And then we say F sharp, and then we say A flat and B flat. And that's very intentional, because if you yell out D flat in the middle of a church service, you will lose half the band. Because you're like, which one is, so it's so weird. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, because in church, it was very common to play a lot of songs in E flat, A flat, and B flat. And if you wanted to get complex in church, you would play a song in G flat or F sharp, which is very known. The Hawkins did a lot of music in the key of F sharp. and it definitely demonstrated their musical vocabulary, and how vast it was for their musical arrangements, and it was difficult for many in that era, to play in F sharp. But now, a lot of songs that are in F sharp, it's not so complicated, because in the key of F sharp, all the black keys work in the pentatonic scale. Anybody in here, if you never played the organ before, could do exactly what I just did, with no hesitation. So the first song I ever remember learning how to play as a kid, I was maybe 2 years old. Because all the black keys work in the key of F sharp. So in the history of the church that we understand, a lot of the talented, gospel singers and musicians were leaving the church to pursue their professional careers, like Sam Cooke, and so on and so forth. So it left what they said, it left the church what they considered talent and musically bankrupt, where you had people who didn't really play as much, who would, try to compensate, for the losses to play the church services. But they could only play, and you guessed it, black keys, because that was simple. And because of the high energy and intensity of church services, you didn't need much, to get into it. So it made those keys easier to play with. So when you hear songs like, there's songs that we call congregational, have you tried Jesus? He's all right, have you tried? I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord. It's about 35,000 songs that had that exact same cadence, and they became very popular in the church world because of that deficit, which made those keys kind of like a staple, just for the songs to be written. So even though now so much talent has emerged in the church, those keys are now like the sound. So when you do it in the music, it doesn't really do the same if you do an A, but A flat is like, there it is. And then people, sometimes we get weird, and it's like, yeah, that's the anointed key. It's like, okay, cool, whatever you say. So that's just, that brief history. So what they did to compensate that, we just started doing, key changes. Songs, modulated from one key to the next, and it made it more inviting for a wider audience of people. So that was that part. That question already came up, and it was something I was going to get into. So I wanted to use that song to show that one. So now I'm going to play a song, Walk With Me, Lord. It's a spiritual, but we're going to play it the way I always learned it, with a blues flair. And I'm going to do that in B flat. So the first song I played was Lord Prepare Me. That was in F, but we'll do this one in B flat, Walk With Me, Lord. All right? And then I'm going to use some of the percussions. For those who may not know what percussions are in order, I'll explain. Actually, I should do that now. Okay, so on the organ, we have, manuals. We have the sets of drawbars. Shout out to the screen because you can see everything. It's kind of like nerdy for me anyway. So, so we have, these 9, what we call drawbars. They're all tones. So I'll just show you. So it's kind of cool because it's like one note plays a chord. Right, okay, cool. So, but on this next set of drawbars, which works on this top manual, on the B, these are the manual presets B. The rest of them are automated tones. It's like a keyboard in here. They're already built. So. And when we get to the manual, it's blank because we actually make it. So on this one, on this upper manual, and it's only on the, if I'm correct, the B3 and above. Of course, there's been modifications, but they have the percussion feature, and that's over on this side. So right now it's off, but if I turn it on, remember there's no drawbar settings. I'm on the second manual, but if I turn it on, so we get a tone that gives it some attack on these drawbars. So now when I pull, so percussion, no percussion, percussion, and then can choose how long it will last. So right now, well, first we can choose how loud it is in conjunction to the drum part. So here's the normal setting, soft setting. So it's a little less noticeable and soft, but it gives it a bite, right? So now, if we're in the, 50s and 60s, this is a big deal. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like nowadays we have so many features, but literally the model of organ before this one didn't have that feature. So it's like, whoa, like, okay, this is the coolest thing since sliced bread. So you can add an edge to it, here's the normal, and then you can control how long it lasts. So right now it's on slow, so it lasts, and then here's fast. So that's a quick decay or a fast decay, slow decay. All right, and then here we get to choose the harmonic or the tone. So this is in a second, and this is in a third. So the third is cool because then it adds like some different harmonic tones. So that's pretty cool. All right. So on this song, I'm going to use that feature to do what we call the melody line. Cool. Lord. On the longest teenage journey. Walk with me. We know life is a journey. Okay, that was 2 songs. Any questions? Cool.
Tell me again, that was A flat or what?
That was B flat.
B flat.
Yeah.
B flat.
B flat minor, technically.
And then second part is I can see your top, the top row, but
Uh-huh.
the bottom row, like I saw you play the black keys on the top. I think I saw you mostly on black on bottom too, is that right?
Yep. So just because of, well, the F, but yeah. So, mimicking, like the C sharp major scale or D flat. Because, B flat minor, D flat major, same thing. So there's a lot of black keys in that one. And the other thing I was doing, every Hammond organ has a different tone. And this one is like really warm. So definitely shout out to this place for such a brilliant instrument. In most churches we play in a 3 o'clock service. There is no warm work.
Trash!
So it's a little bit unfamiliar to me to play organ with like a full tone. So what I was doing was compensating in my drawbar settings so I wouldn't sound like muddy to clean up. Go ahead.
Are you playing the full bass line with your foot or you just pulsing?
So on this one, I was playing the full bass line with my foot and
You
kind of
can't
pulsing.
see it.
Yeah.
So you
So
went back and forth between playing the line and pulsing.
exactly.
That's-
Because I'm not like a, I don't profess to be like a jazz player like that. Like great. Yeah, I got a friend that snuck in here that's really amazing. But anyway, growing up in church, we need to play like all the parts. So we kind of have to train and put in a good indicator that we've been out of practice is when we have to play what we call a 3 o'clock service. That's always those afternoon programs where nobody shows up, but like maybe the one guy. So you gotta hold it down for like the whole band. And if you haven't been in like practice, you definitely feel it in your legs, like in your calves and in your shin, like it's gonna be definitely strained. Especially if they get happy and they play what we call a praise break. I'm gonna get into that as well. There's a couple of variations of that, but yeah, so for me growing up primarily, we had to play the actual bass line with the beat. And then of course, more traditionally in jazz organ, it's pulses. And even some modern, electronic organs without pedals, you can plug up like a sustain pedal and it will still give you the pulsating feature from the bass pedal, just to accommodate that. So sometimes it's hard to move around. It's cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, on your previous song, Perfect, right after you did that nice long repetitious note,
Yeah.
you did some beautiful 200 voicings on the upper manual.
Thank you. Okay.
Could you speak to that? I mean, how you constructed those and for the Hammond, how you...
Yeah. Of course, again, growing up in church, I'm going to say that 158 million times in this masterclass because that's my strongest basis of knowledge of this instrument. And to your point, the harmonies come from just being in choir rehearsal too much. and the ensemble rehearsals that we call the praise team or the worship team, now it evolves in terminology. It's an ensemble. And over time, we have to learn the vocal parts for the soprano, for the altos, for the tenors. That's pretty much it. Sometimes basses, but so when I'm harmonies, we got what do we do here? This is our main note. This would be like the alto. So the soprano would always be up at third, and then it's just like a regular chord. They move together. And I would spend hours and hours and hours just, sitting in the church in the dark,
You would.
learning, figuring out things like. Yeah, like 10 hours for that. You're welcome. So that's pretty much, where I came from. Is that
Dave.
your question? Yep.
Break down combo 2. So what I mean by how you did Walk With Me,
Mm-hmm.
you wanted bluesy, but you wanted to progress to get there.
Right.
Notice how your playing changed to make me play
Yes.
different, and then as you changed, I changed. Break that down and then to show them how you can orchestrate a whole situation without talking.
Well, first I need a drummer that's as competent as you are. There's that. And so, you know, the word dynamics is everything. It's like, I mean, dynamics is what would make, you know, what I would hope would make this class enjoyable, because it's not just, you know, just screaming at you the whole time, like how we have to endure sometimes and
Yes.
we walk out with our ears ringing. So, just in my mood with that, even with, you know, draw bar moves. So if you notice, I was on the percussive thing, and I'll go through, I got some very general settings that I always use, but if you notice, this tone is kind of like, you know, like a medium full. So if the drummer is hearing me, you know, in this mind, in this frame, in this vein, it's kind of like a softer tone. But as we get brighter, or like he said, so I want to build it up to come like a little bit out of the bluesy thing and make it more aggressive. So I pull out more draw bars. So as my tone brightens up, that's a cue for the drummer to like, okay, you know, bring it. And then once we go back down, and that's kind of like how we communicate, because we did not rehearse before this. I literally showed him a set list when I came here, and it was like, there we go, follow me. So, you know, again, if you have a brilliant, amazing drummer such as this one here, that's easy to do. Is that?
I've been playing with you since for a very long time.
All right, I see you, go ahead.
No, I'm not sure if you were saying this when you're talking about the difference between E flat and D sharp. Like, I never realized they're the same note, but we never call it D sharp, we call it E flat. We call it D
There's
sharp,
proof.
not A flat. But why is that? I never realized.
Now, that's the $1 million question. Why do we call it that? I don't know.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Joe,
Yeah, do you know anything about the enharmonic equivalence, like where you can use the D sharp and E flat, for example? Because what I've learned when I was studying music theory is that no matter what kind of note it is, that they always have the same sound and pitch.
Right. No, it's literally piggybacking off the previous question. It's the same note.
Right.
So now, if we're playing notated music, you know, depending on the key signature, you know, that's going to make or break, you know, the entire song. Whether you put, you know, a flat or a sharp, because, you know, if we're in a key signature that's sharps, we gotta, you know, follow the rules that is sharps. And if we're in a key signature that has flats, we've got to follow the rules. Unfortunately, in church playing by ear, they don't follow. They have their own set of rules. I don't want to say they don't follow the rules. They have their own set of rules. So again, just, you know, commonly, especially in this area, some other churches, you know, some of the areas where they have churches, they will say D flat. But in the Bay Area, if you say D flat in the church, you would lose the entire band. It's called C sharp. And then again, it's not G flat, it's F sharp. And that's just the way it is. So that's you know, that's the answer. It's like there's nothing, you know, strategic.
It is what it is.
Yeah, there you go. It's been that way, you know, and I'm only 40, so it predates me. So there's that.
Can you talk about your Leslie, your Leslie work? Is that a preference thing or a style thing, or what drives when you flip the switch?
Good. So it's again, growing up, there's organists that, you know, just unconsciously or maybe sometimes like nervous twitch, they just flip the Leslie just all day. Now, I don't know if this is a fact, but it was reported to me, it was told to me by a friend that is very knowledgeable and very passionate about, you know, the construct of the Hammond organs, that it takes, I think, 13 seconds for the Leslie to reach full speed but now they have modifications in like every Leslie, so I don't know if that's all the way true, but there's a relay in the motor system in the Leslie as well, and if you keep flipping the switch just, you know, for no real reason, like you burn the relay out faster. So over time, and I used to be that kid, I would just, you know, every time. But now, to your point, I learned a lot from a very amazing musician named Rodney East from Chicago. And when he would play, and it's a part I'm gonna get into where we talk about backing up a preacher or when a preacher tunes up. but it's kind of like these hits and chords. So every time he would play one chord, he would put the Leslie before the next chord. So every chord like sounded different. So that was like the start of my concept for, the Leslie, the switching between the what's called a chorale and a tremolo, or we just call it fast and slow. So, but then also going back to his point, of awareness, it also adds to a dynamic. So if I wanted to be quieter, the slow is, much more, subtle in the tone. The fast is more aggressive in the tone. So I've learned to even utilize that from a dynamic playing where if I really want to drive it home and really, want to push a part, I'll leave it slow for the whole, for the duration of, that whole point up until then, just for a dramatic effect. So I'll show you something. So that's for me, like how I use it, more of a dynamic and more of a color.
Do you think that 13 seconds it takes to ramp up and down, that's also a harmonic device, right?
Absolutely.
You can use that.
Yeah, you definitely can.
Unique sound.
Yes. So imagine, because even the history of the Leslie has changed and evolved. When they first made it, it was only fast and no speed. It would just, it was or what we call now break. So that was, so to add the slow, or what we call the chorale, and then go to the fast, again, this is the 60s and 70s, we're talking about revolutionary breakthrough technology, it totally changed the sound. So they absolutely use it for that. And then, I don't know, I can't see it, but sometimes they have what's called deflectors on there, and that also, it enhances what's called like the Doppler effect. So the whole reason why they made the Leslie was to emulate the sound of a church or cathedral having pipes around the building. So the intent of the Leslie was to throw the sound around the room. It failed miserably, but it came up with something wonderful. And it's been a staple ever since. Is there any more questions? Okay, I'm gonna play another song. Okay, so this song, this for for church and for gospel music, this is definitely one of my favorite songs. It's called "We Offer Praise." And it's in C. I like that song. There's a lot of classical moves in that song. I learned that song when I was about 12. And funny story, there was a guy that, his name is Steve Warren. He's amazing, thank God, for his life. He's still with us. But he came when I was 12, and he taught that song to a youth choir. And I really didn't play so well at 12, but they kind of showed me the song in rehearsal. It was kind of like crash course. And so the night that the choir performed the song, in the middle of the song, to kind of like enhance directing the choir, he got off the piano and like motioned me to come, to take over. And he went before the choir, he's directing. And then he comes back to the piano because I was totally blowing. So this was the song that got away that night. So I've since then I went back and perfected it, and I made sure that never get kicked off the head. You need those humbling moments. And then it's just what it's saying. For God's goodness and for His mercy, we offer praise. We give praise. So this amazing song again by Rodney Bryant. And so with that one, we utilize even, the use of, like I said, the Leslie speech, the dramatic build-ups and things like that. And then there are some things that we do that I learned in church, and I call them like organ trills. So sometimes I play the melody line, and then, like they said, we're gonna put the stink on there, add some soul to it, and go. And so sometimes the singers in church, they don't know how to sing like straight notes. They don't go. They always like. So over time, we hear that so much, you try to emulate what they sing, because if you get a melody line, it sounds dry and stuff. And the fun part about the organ, because it's not a piano, the touch is totally different. The response is totally different. You don't have a sustained pedal, so you have to learn what a lot of people call the organ crawl. So even when we're, playing those trills and things like that, you still gotta crawl the notes because you don't want it to go. So that's like 2 years right there. Just give you a finger, you know. So, if you see my pinky finger, but I'm holding one note so you don't hear the gap, you know. And everybody has their own, you know, technique, just like your fingerprint, everybody's gonna play it different. But the sound is there. And then I have guys that, you know, go. There's also another way to kind of like pass over the break of not having a sustain pedal. And I know musicians that play piano well in church and they won't touch an organ. And I know musicians that play organ well and they won't touch a piano because that margin, you know, that barrier is very intense. You know, if you've gotten comfortable on something. So I'm grateful to, you know, grow up in a church setting that had a piano and an organ where I had to learn how to approach both instruments. And then, like I said, to find out that the organ predates the piano in the first place, which is very amazing. I think it even goes all the way back to 300 BC. Fact check me, but you know, they poured water in the tube and they blew in it, boop, and that's called an organ. That's where they got the pipe organ from. They put water, you know, in the pipes and they made sound with air. And then they got fancy and they came up, you know, with bellows and things that would blow the air for them. And to the point where, you know, the organs became so big you could press the key to pass the air through, and they would have to have people on the other side, you know, turning wheels or, you know, stepping on bellows to push air through. So, you know, you'd see a guy playing a concert, but there's like a whole workforce, you know, below this floor that's like sweating, like, you know, working hard, because if they miss a beat, their organ goes out of tune. And now, you know, we get to the Hammond organ, which was a very, you know, convenient in the technological revolution, because churches, you know, were growing. There were more churches, and they all wanted the organ sound, but a pipe organ could cost anywhere, you know, between, like in today's money, it could cost like $1 million per pipe organ, like literally, because they had to build it into the architecture of the structure. So it was a big deal. It would take months, almost years to build. When they were done, churches would have whole, you know, services just to dedicate the new organ. It's like a big deal. And then John Hammond comes along with this invention. He wasn't even a musician. He was like an inventor. You know, he knew how to make clocks and things like that. And that's when he came up with the concept of the tone wheel to pass the tone through. And he invented this marvelous instrument, and that totally changed the market for churches when it came to organ, because now churches that didn't have the budget to build a pipe organ could now have the sound of an organ in their church because of Hammond. And there were whole commercials like we see now, like, you know, to get your windows replaced or new bathrooms installed. There were Hammond commercials like that. You know, won't you love the sound of a Hammond organ in a church? Now you can have your own. It's like, so churches would have meetings and board meetings, and, you know, they would come up and buy this instrument because it was, you know, popularized in church. And then, of course, because it was able to be attainable, that's how it made its way into rock bands and the jazz and things like that. But again, they call the organ the king of instruments because it dates all the way back to BC. So, you know, there's a lot of heritage that comes with the sound. And like I said, so even choosing a song like We Offer Praise, there's a lot of classical music nuances that goes into that song, which really brings that out. And so to know the history behind it, why it all ties in and why it makes sense, it's really special to me. So I was really happy to share that song. And you go ahead, sir, you had.
Two questions.
Cool.
One is, when you go from one B3 to another B3 to another B3, versus a B3 to a C3 to an A100, for example, can you talk about the nuances between the B3 to B3 versus the other Hammonds?
Sure. So the biggest thing with the B3 to a C3 is literally the casing. And even funny because of church, you know, church follows, you know, modesty, and they were a lot of, you know, women that played organ as well. So once they started putting the organ on a stage, you know, it was, you know, a thing of modesty because, you know, they wear dress and skirts. You don't want, you know, a bunch of guys like gawking at the organs, you know, while you're playing. So they came up with the case, you know, to kind of just, you know, add modesty, just like a podium, you know, when somebody's preaching, because sitting down at an elevated position is a vulnerable position to be in. And so literally that is just a design, but the interior of it, like all the components in a C3 and a B3 are the exact same. You could literally like cut out a B3 and put it in a C3 and it would work. Now, you mentioned something about the A series. So the A series, which is what this is, it has an internal speaker. So you don't need, and I'm gonna get into the Leslie thing because I don't know if anyone knows in here, but these two companies, these are two different companies. They were not at all related, and honestly, it was not welcomed. Yeah, very dense history. So, so when you had a Hammond organ, you would have to buy a Hammond speaker because the instrument itself wouldn't make sound unless you had a speaker to produce the sound that was coming from it. And then when we get to the A series, it was kind of like like a combo amp version of an organ and put the speaker in here. So this one actually works without the Leslie, so I can switch the Leslie off and we can hear what the speaker here does. So the thing is, there's no switch for that, but we still have the vibrato, which comes from the pipe organ as well. So a lot of times growing up, when we didn't have Leslies in churches that had A100s because they were substantially less money. Why? Because people thought because it was a smaller profile that it was anything different than the B3, and absolutely that's wrong. It's the exact same thing. It's just in a smaller, console, or a smaller profile, but it's the same thing as a B3. But that's what we would do to get the, Leslie effect. We would just use the vibrato switches.
From one to another of the same model,
Mm-hmm.
are they going to have different personalities?
Not in the 3 series. Now here's the thing. Now if you go from a B3 to a B2, totally different. The B3 has the percussions, the B2 doesn't. If you want to go before that, there's even a BB, and it changes the vibrato situation. You don't get the C3, you don't get it, you just get like the chorus 1, chorus 2. So the 3 on this manual literally is because the B3 or the C3. Like again, if you're in the 60s and 70s, adding one feature to an instrument is like a big deal. And so that was the technological advance coming from a B2 to a B3. But a B3 to a C3 to an A100, they all play the exact same. Yep.
I have a question about the chorus vibrato knob.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you like to put that?
So, because I grew up in the the 3 series era, that's the sound that I'm more familiar to. There's I have a friend named Demetrius Tolbray who absolutely hates the C3 or the B sound or the B3 sound, so he uses 2. So I use C2 and it's chorus and vibrato. So I'll start with, so here's chorus 1. So, and just so you see, the reason why we have 2 that control both manuals. So that's this one. And this is the top. So this is the swell and the grade. If you know anything about pipe organs, they have the exact same terminology, with the top manual being the swell, the lower manual being the grade. So they totally copied it. So here's the C1. And here's C2. So it's a little more intense, and then here's C3. Very intense. So I'll turn it down because it's like it gets lost in the acoustics. That's 3. Like more subtle. It's kind of like a mid version. And that's the most aggressive. Now then you got the vibrato. And that's a different tone. And here's the 2. And then here's the 3. So every number, like the effect gets more intense, and that's like literally years of transition of build. And I learned a cool trick from a big brother of mine is a huge influence in my life, named Kim McMillan. we play at church together. He taught me, he's a synthesizer guy, so he taught me how to emulate even like a synthesizer modulation with the organ, even while doing the solo. So. That's pretty cool. You see that? So that's, just utilizing the chorus and vibrato. I saw your hand go up. I'm not gonna miss that.
Yeah, I was wondering, where did it go from the pipe organ? Like, where in the century did it go from the pipe organ to a regular organ like you're playing? Or was it mostly in the black church, or was it across the board for everybody?
It was, so I want to say the Hammond organ was invented somewhere around the 30s and the 40s, and that's in Chicago. So literally, between the 30s and 40s is where we started seeing that transition. It was still, very prestigious to have a pipe organ. I mean, there's modern churches like, Cathedral Christ the Light has a pipe organ in it. It's a more modern church, but it's a very prestigious thing to have. But, for communities that didn't want to spend the money or didn't have it to spend, and this was, it wasn't just black. It was, all cultures, and honestly, it started in white churches, honestly, and so, the concept of the Hammond organ, so it was very universal, and again, the leveling of the playing field was the portability, and then the portability, because that was the other thing. You build a church, you got a congregation, it grows, you need a new building, you have to build a new pipe organ, because the one you had doesn't fit the acoustics of the new building. Sometimes they could use the parts, but it was like a whole other project, and then they wouldn't want the old organ because they would want to keep it there, for whatever activities they did there, because there is no iPod and a Bluetooth speaker to play music. Like, you needed an instrument, at that time. So that's where, it got weird. They said, well, here's this thing that can go from one, location to the next. And so the convenience of it all that was the real game changer. And so, again, so I'll get into the lesson. Is there another question about that, maybe? Okay, cool. So let's get into the lesson, because it's not just called a Leslie speaker. That's the name of the company. John Hammond and Don Leslie. I could be saying that backwards, but anyway. So Hammond was good with having the speaker. It was Leslie that came up with the concept to, like I said, throw the sound around the room, because again, in traditional cathedrals, there were pipes all around the church. And if you played one manual, it would play on one side of the church, and another manual would play on another side. So we've been doing 7.1 surround sound for a long time. It's not new. And so again, to try to emulate that, that's what Leslie came up with the idea, to spin the sound. And they had deflectors on the horns that would help create this Doppler effect to sound like it was spinning. Hammond absolutely hated the sound that the Leslie speaker added to his organ. It was definitely not, his sights, and he thought, it totally was, sacrilegious, and just, totally diminished like the sacredness of the sound. But contrary to his belief, the general public loved it, and so everybody had to have a Hammond organ and a Leslie speaker. So yeah, there were rival companies for a long time until finally Hammond, having a business mind, they acquired the Leslie company, and then the rest was history. But yeah, so it was and then that became the sound, and from there, that's where we see the rise of the Hammond organ and the Leslie speaker in the black church, going for the 50s and the 60s, and predominantly in Chicago. Why? Because the Hammond organ company is based out of Chicago. And there's even now a company that took over the old factory of Hammond, and they now sell organs as well. They totally rebuild them. I mean, I've never played a brand new organ before because I wasn't born anywhere around the 60s or 70s, but they restore them. They clean the brass, everything. They rekey the whole thing, and so it's like playing a brand new built organ, and it's the most amazing experience. And then there's a showroom floor where there's just like 20 organs, just there. You get a black one, walnut, cherry wood. It's like crazy. It's like almost scary, but so just continuing in that history. That's where we started seeing more organs. 50s and 60s, it was like the thing, and then. Even now, churches that are closing down all over the world, the pipe organs are going to the scrapyard.
No.
Yes, yeah. So they're giving away pipe organs now, because they have no use for them. And one of the biggest declines that happened to the Hammond organ industry was the invention of synthesizers. Before a synthesizer, the most you could manipulate a keyboard was a Hammond. A Fender Rhodes emulated a piano. They added some features for tremolo and things like that, but you couldn't really change the tone without all these different gadgets to do it. And so the organ is still like the reigning champion, and being able to have different tones and all of those different dynamics. But once the synthesizers came out, it was the coolest thing. Like, you could press a button and change the sound, or turn a knob and do it. It was like amazing. And so the Hammond sales drastically declined, at the appearance of the synthesizers. And they ultimately got acquired by a company that was out of the country. And so they didn't make, basically, I think the 70s were like the last, versions of like the tone wheel organs before they started going digital. Then now we have, keyboard companies like Nord and Viscount that do a really amazing job, like I said, with emulating the tonal organ and even having features, like I said, with the pulsing pedal, so, and those, they got one cable you plug up, you can plug headphones in and practice at home, so it's totally, revolutionizes the experience, because before that we'd have to go to church to practice, so. Just technology, sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's not. But now these are also very expensive to buy as a result, because they're a rarity and they work. And I don't know if you guys know, but organs are like cars. You got motors, and you got all kind of different plugs and things like soldering. And if something goes down, you need a mechanic to work on the organ. It's not fun. So it's a very precious instrument. Any more questions? Cool. Oh, go ahead.
Do you find that different B3s have different personalities, different feels, different sounds?
Absolutely. So in the beginning, they definitely did quality control of every instrument that came out to be at a certain standard. So they were very consistent, coming off the assembly line. But of course, over time, depending on the player and how they were used, it would definitely affect the feel of the organ. Like, again, I never felt what it was to play like a brand new Hammond. So when I played one that was like completely restored, I played so many wrong notes because, I'm used to giving more effort, and I totally had to change my touch to know what the original feel of the organ really was. So, and then, don't get me started on pedals. Some churches, the pedals are stiff, and some of them they're loose, and sometimes they bounce because they need to be readjusted. And so, going from different places, and then also the room. Like in here, another reason why this organ sounds so great is because the room, is conducive, for the acoustics. But if you go to a church where the stage is heavily carpeted, it totally like swallows up all the tone of the lesson. And you're like driving. It's just like trying to run through mud. It's just yeah. But you can take that same organ and bring it in here, and it's like, oh, that's what it sounds like, So, and then they have very active components. The drivers go dull. They change out different parts. Some parts that weren't intended to be in there. That might be cool or it might not. I'm kind of a purist. I like things just like, the way they were supposed to be. But I know people that even, put lights in the lesson. So when you flip it on fast, like it'll go like red, and you go slow, it'll go blue. I've seen it all.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I know guys that put, car subwoofers in the bottom of the organ, so the bass is like super loud. And again, we grew up in churches with no bass players, so they did all these kind of things to try to compensate, for the void. So those are factors that would make one organ sound, different from another one. And sometimes, it was more enjoyable to play, at different locations based on that factor because of what the work was. Or just if the organ was fully functional, because you could get away, with an organ, in the service, and like 65% of it, is working, and the other 45 is like out. The percussions could be gone, certain drawbars could be not functional, certain buttons. Yeah, but it's like, there's a guy or somebody that plays there, every week, and they just play around it. So when you come complaining like, hey, this doesn't work, it's like, get him off, he doesn't know what he's doing. You're just like, no, this is broke, but it's just how it is, So things like that. So again, now you understand why I'm so grateful about this instrument because it's in tip-top shape. It sounds amazing, so I'm very grateful.
And we miss Bob Schleicher.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely miss Bob. Any other questions? Okay.
For your pedals, do you ever, faster tunes, are you using both feet to do the thing, or are you always just...
No, I'm not that cool. I have friends that are really that good. I don't really use the 2 beat because I haven't practiced it. And even when it's faster, like, we got this heel toe thing. You can't see, but it's like, so the notes I'm using is like, so you can imagine I'm like toe, heel, toe, heel, toe, heel. And then here's this like pivot of a heel, and then toe again, and heel, toe, and so forth. And so, we practice that, for years. And so I'm gonna get into more of that in another song that I'm gonna play to kind of show how we have to maneuver the faster songs. And then, we improvise, we pick up the bass notes as well. Like some notes, it sounds like it's all pedals, but we're like, enhancing it, that's the word, enhancing it from the left end or embellishing, either. So that's the next song. I think that's the next one. Any more questions?
From here.
Okay.
I'm probably jumping ahead, but
That's fine.
before, change the subject, before the end of the section, there's this thing that you do where you kind of bend notes and kind of, I don't know, you know what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
how you did at my party. Can you do an example of that?
Yeah, so that's what I said. So on this one, we just kind of do it with the trill, so like I said, you can go, or you can go, things like that. So it's like those, give that effect, like we're bending the note and giving like, kind of like because, a singer, when you add soul to, like I said, you put this thing on it, they don't just go in, they go. But if I said, it's like this little sparrow, so just to add the player, like just like she said, like bending up. So I'm not really bending it, but that the other 2 notes that I'm adding it to give it the. So that's like, 10 more thousand hours. And then learning how to hold the one note and not let the other ones go to break it. And try to emulate the human voice, the real greatest instrument we will ever have. So that's, cool. Anybody? Go. Who is it? Yep. Oh, play. You want to hear something? All right. So this it has a lot of different terms. It's called shouting music.
Oh, crap.
I'm not gonna bring you up to that. Because clearly it's fast. But the term shout is, to me, to exclaim vocally, so I don't really know how we got into, something that was fast and we called it shout, except there's a song that came out that says, you make me want to shout, and it was to the cadence or tempo of what we would play in a church or a high-spirited energy church service where people would, get up and dance, and they would actually shout, with this music. And so they took the expression and put it in a song, and I believe that's where we got the term shouting music. So thanks, Isley Brothers, for that. It's the most confusing thing in the world. So, because there are people, that are unchurched or don't know what that is, say shouting music, they might think we're just going to start yelling. And it's like, no, it's more of, dancing. It's fast-paced dancing, sometimes running, depending on, your dispensation. But now we just call them praise breaks or bumps. So anyway, we'll get into that. So sometimes it starts like, subtle, like with a wind up. It's kind of like cooking, like you're brewing something, it's heating up, it's getting warm. So that's kind of like, what it gives the effect of. Now, I don't really know. It's I don't want to say they don't follow the rules. It's a new set of rules, and you got to be prepared for both. So I'm going to do it the way that I grew up, which is for me better. I'm going to say it like that. I'm going to say everything correct. For me, it's better. So we'll start off something like this. Back to your question about the beat. So that one, I'm like really playing. Man, B flat. And that's a good question because in 8, that's harder. So it's like, the coordination is weird, but the placement is different. So my body is accustomed to like B flat or A flat, So, but then what we also do is sometimes, I'm going in between both. So it's like, you don't know what's happening. And I can move between manuals fast enough to like, embellish the bass and then come back before you realize that's what happens. See what I'm saying? You do it together. Sometimes you do harmony, just like cool things. And you're like, okay, wow, so, and then get out. Because I can't keep doing it. I might have like 3 good notes, and then I got to like come back. So, I don't want you to know the pork one's going to crash and burn. Okay, so that's one. And then sometimes they just, go straight to the ceiling, so they'll get If you notice, I put up 2 fingers to let him, we're coming to the end, so he knows to hit it twice instead of just one. So, but that one, that's just, like I said, they just go straight out the gate. That means somebody stood up and probably just started running. So I don't have time to sizzle, like, cause then I'll have to catch up. So it's like, if they take off, so go straight there. So, and then you notice, because you don't have that warm-up time, that's more taxing to your foot. So that's what, so we, the arrangement, that walk-up is what we call, that's my rest. I can stay there for about, 2 minutes. And if I'm real tired, I can just get creative with it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it can go long sometimes. And it's like, you won't be able to walk if you do. It's a lot. So, and then that walk-up is like, really originated by Twinkie Clark. They call her like the queen of the B3. She's church-born, member of the Clark Sisters, legendary gospel group, but that's her walk-up. And so that's, something that we would add in there, and we have variations. So all these things. But another big part of even playing the praise break, the bump, the shout music, is the cadence. So on this one, I'm sticking to the, and then sometimes I'm doing this trill. Now the crazy part is, if I do that on the percussions, it won't come out because the percussions cut off if you slide. It's not really pronounced. But if I do here, slide the percussion. So adding that. But because I'm not playing the percussions, I can cheat. So imagine, like, I could probably, if you didn't play with keys already, I could show you how to play that in about maybe 10 minutes, and you'd be the new church organist just because you fixed that part. I said, he's got it. And just don't have a drop it. The same thing, but the organ like does the job for you, and it's like, boom, now you're a church organist. And so those are different cadences that we play, throughout it, and that's kind of like a big deal. Even like kind of like the 80s that we go. Like the minor third and the major fourth, or minor third, major. And so they would, and that would go, and then they could run the bass line. And again, I could show you that in about 5 minutes, and you'd be hired because now you got to. So, just little things that we do to add in here. And so after that, it was kind of like just a free-for-all, like a, pentatonic scale, the blues scale, things like that. And then they started, writing songs, at that speed. So, yeah, we'll do that one.
That's power.
All right.
to that tempo. All right, so that's praise breaks and or dance, gospel dance music, bumps, shouting music, fast paced music, happy time, Holy Ghost, whatever, it's all these different terms, but it's that, And then, like, you don't even have to play good, but if you know how to manipulate the instrument, you can hold like one note and like get away and like with the cadence of the pedal, say, woo, it's like you just hit more. It's like, wow, you really playing. It's like, you don't even know how to play, you just make up notes. And there's guys that are on like videos that literally do that. Like they're not playing anything like theoretically accurate. They have no real knowledge, but they know how to manipulate the instrument, and they're literally playing like just lots of chords, but because they know how to, it's like they sound like they're playing. And if you don't have, a musical ear, it sounds like, everything else because it's just loud, So the Hammond is like really cool because it make, a rookie sound like a pro. You know what you're doing. Piano, not so much. You gotta know what's happening, or it just sounds like noise. So that's one of the, the benefits, of the Hammond. It's real attractive to a younger person, because, the piano, like I said, could be a little intimidating because it's like, but here it's like, it could be, this one note could be so many different things. So it's like you're a pro just for clicking buttons. It's like, it's cool, so, yeah, that's the praise breaks. Any questions? All the way in the back.
So just you talking about the history of the organ and pipe organs, and then hearing you play, it's so incredible. I can't imagine how you're able to keep track of so many things all at once. But it just made me think, besides all the great Hammond players, when I think about the organ, I often think of like J.S. Bach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm curious if that, because I heard you play a little bit of that directly, but
yeah.
I wonder if that music is important to your development, is it important to how you still play?
Yes, because most classical musicians that play, keyboards, it was actually on organs, because organs predate pianos. So, it's a very, very, very strong, classical heritage. And even the drawbars in some of the settings, they mimic orchestras. So like there's a setting on here that says flute and string, they got reeds, full grade was emulating symphony. So the organ is like very symphonic, and that's where it came from with the classical music. So a lot of the great composers were actually organists, So the piano we think is like the prestigious classical sound. No, it's the organ, but have fun, putting a pipe organ in your house. You know what I'm saying? Like understanding the architecture. And then they made, smaller or more compact pipe organs as well, but that was kind of like a frown, because it's like you could have it, but then if you go to the church, it totally dwarf yours. So it was like, what was the point of spending the money, unless you're just an enthusiast. So that's why the piano was even, popular for that, because it was easier to attain, you could move it until, and there were many other, attempts at, electronic organs at the time, but the Hammond, just totally beat out the market. I had another hit, yeah.
So there are different components of the church service. You talk about the art of playing during prayer, and then playing behind the pastor, behind the preacher.
Yes. Okay, that's cool. I'm gonna do that.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. You started
coming.
I was just gonna say, think back about Bob.
Okay.
He got fired a bunch of times.
Okay.
And it's one thing to lose your job, but he also lost his instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the church fires you,
yeah,
you don't got a place to play.
And then, to your earlier question about playing the different organs, no two pipe organs were the same, ever. And so, if an organist was traveling, to play a concert or recital, on a different venue, they would have to get there at least, a week before just to get acclimated and, check, make any notations, to the music to be able to play that organ accurately or what the music that they were playing required. And again, that was like a huge bonus for the Hammond because it was consistent. Every Hammond, had the same layout, so you can go one place and you didn't have that learning curve. So that's what made it amazing. But that's cool. So that was the next part of what I was going to go through. So even like when you say like a part of a service where you could play for a prayer, well, there's different kind of prayers. And one prayer might encompass the totality of a service because you have dear Father, we come today, to thank you for the birds and the flowers and the trees. And then you have, one church, Heavenly Father. So it's like, you gotta literally know, and then you have the children, I want to thank God for mommy and daddy, and what's the church, so you gotta really know, it's more of a dynamic approach, So, traditionally, like if we're starting up, like the way I grew up, which is, for me, of course, my favorite, it didn't come in rambunctious, it was reverent, this is the time that we came together to share, what we have, strengthen each other, so, you might hear somebody, say, as you come in, focus your hearts and your minds on God, and, don't worry about if you left the oven on or the garage door open, this is not the time for that, and this is the music that you play around it, everybody feels like calm now, because that's what it does, music is the fastest way to change the atmosphere, so, those are those things, and then, when you want to make, certain proclamations, to say like, the world is crazy, but, we don't sorrow as the world because we have hope, I can write it right here, it's like now everybody's spirit just got lifted, he's smiling now and didn't even realize it. So that's the beauty of music, to accommodate or to accompany, what's being said, what's going forth, and that's, what we are, we're accompanies at the end of the day. And so, some things are said, some things are felt. And so my job, the organist's job is to accompany, those nuances of feeling in the service. And so then, like I said, when you got, the rare up, and then so this is the preacher, and, in John chapter 1. And so here I'm doing a thing where I'm flipping the Leslie every other chord to give it like, the dissonance, so this is the Leslie on slow, now it's on fast, now you hear the difference, go back to slow, so it's kind of like following that whole thing, and they get like, and then I'm like, I'm trying to emulate what the person, what the mic is doing, so if they're screaming, I'm screaming, they're like, we thank you, smooth it out, so that's like learning those different, attributes to, accompany what's going before me. And again, some prayers, I mean, it might start that deal, and then they'll say, God, we thank you. And then like somewhere that, we thank you, Heavenly Father. Just those different tonal changes, going from a major to a minor, that's a big one. Because just with the draw bars, we can make a dramatic approach. So going there. Movement, but because of the dynamics, you can, do the whole church service with those highs and lows. So, yeah, that's, like I said, the prayer, that can cover the whole scope of that. And, there's, I'm sure everybody here has remotely heard of Aretha Franklin before. So her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, is one of the preachers that made what we call tuning, or what they call hooping in their sermons, like the most popular. There were other preachers that did it, but he was most famous for it because he was a very talented singer. And so they called it hooping because just taking the breaths. I'm trying to be kind about how I say it, but like the wind capacity, they would exert so much energy, they would breathe in the middle, and it would sound like a whoop. It was like, we thank God. So that, It's a whoop, and they call it hooping. So they say he's hooping, you know. So you guys, you know, kids half my age, they try to mimic that. Yeah, and it's like, dude, you're like a kid, you're athletic, like you don't have problems breathing. Like, what are you doing? But that's the sound of hooping, you know. So it's like it doesn't have the effect without it. So that's what it's called. But it's really just, you know, tuning up or just flat out singing, and that part of it is special because the singing is like, you know, that's the hymn, and I sing because I'm happy. So when you would get to a climactic point, they would sing. And so that's really all it was. And so it just made it really impactful and powerful. And so now, you know, they turn it into something. So sometimes it works, it's great. Sometimes it's like, okay. So yeah, that's that part. Church services. Any questions? Yep.
I've already asked the question, so somebody has the first.
Okay.
What's your approach, either in church or in secular settings, to playing with the organ and piano together?
Okay, that's amazing. Does anybody here know who Coapole is? Very talented Bay Area artist. And she's a soul, neo-soul, R&B artist, and there's a lot of B3 in her music and piano because it kind of like matches that jazz thing. So, you know, outside of the church, the tones would change because I don't, you know, want to make an artist that has like a smoother tone. You know, I don't want an over-aggressive situation. Like, you don't want to play Coapole. You know, she's going to be smooth. Or like, you know, so that's the thing. So you don't want to play that. It's like, no, that's, you know, it's a totally different setting, and it's not, you know, the feel of what she's going for. And so, and then are you guys saying like playing them together or just?
If the band had a pianist and an organist,
Yeah.
how would you play together?
So sometimes I'll get you. Sometimes if we're in a, you know, church environment, a lot of times the chords between the organ and the piano are like either exactly match, almost like a layer, or somebody's what we call padding, which is kind of like hanging on to the chords, and somebody's like chopping, which is, you know, kind of like giving a pulse on the chords. And that could go between the two, because sometimes the piano would, you know, if the organ is, or sometimes because the organ does better at sustaining notes, you would have the organ, you know, pad. And sometimes they said, hey man, I'm a pad, you know, so you could, you know, you can bring it up, or vice versa. And honestly, for a church, that's the like largest, like, you know, variable for, you know, between the organ dynamic for the organist and the pianist together. In secular, it's more parts, you know, or I don't want to say secular, you know, outside of, you know, gospel, there's more, you know, parts. Like Carl Wheeler is one of the, you know, great organ legends, you know, in the Bay Area right now, but he understands the instrument, you know, very well, and there's a lot of parts where he might just play, you know, something like, you know, but the song is like, you know, and that could be like the piano part with the kids or something. So it's like, you know, that would be, I'm, you know, embellishing what the pianist might be playing, or like on the road or something like that. But Carl Wheeler like would play parts, you know, and then that's the song. It's like if you play the Rhodes by itself, it's like, yeah, but it's missing the other thing, you know. It's like because he has, you know, successfully established parts on many songs, you know. So I feel like the music outside, when it comes to the keyboards, is just a lot more structured and detailed when it comes to those things like parts, you know, versus, you know, in the church world, it's like everybody lines up with the same chord. So even like me doing two hands, like it's still like a derivative with both players. Like, the pianist might actually be playing this part. But the organ call organists in a full band setting. We call them, we say, oh, they came with their skates on, because the organ like could not know any of the song, but understand the concept of music and fit in every time. It's like when it gets loud, they know to go. It's like, just knowing how to do those different, accents and slides, you can literally navigate your way through pretty much any gospel song, unless they go to like some Andre Crouch change that you really need to know, and it's like, oh, you blew it, but other than that, if we're like in a groove, it's like, it's really easy to just fall in, and sometimes, even in rehearsals, it's like, well, he's just playing organ. And like, that's literally their approach. It's like, yeah, he'll get it. You just fall in, it's like, okay, cool. So that's, for me, that's like a big difference, between, the gospel and everything else, Yeah.
Yeah, what is the most challenging part of learning how to play the B3 organ?
Man, playing with your two hands and your feet, playing three different things at once, and staying in tempo, and also a lot of the music in church is not structured, so you have to look for cues, to go to the next part. So that's something else to go along while you're rubbing your stomach and patting your head, like that's the same concept. And like I said, and then even like we said, playing the faster pace music. Fortunately for me, I learned how to play drums first. So like percussion was already there for me, to kind of have the independence. But I could, so that's 10,000 hours.
Yeah, my next question is, are you able to play other kinds of music besides gospel music?
I know like one classical tune barely. And it's only because gospel artists put it in the song, but
Hey, in a typical gospel setting, you don't have notation or even a chord chart frequently.
Sometimes a chord chart, sometimes.
But not all the time.
95% of the time, no.
You gotta feel it or know it.
You feel it or know it, but music is cultural. So a lot for me. There are songs that I've heard my whole life that are still sung like constantly, even today. And so I remember just learning as a musician. There were songs that my mother sang so much as a child. Once I had an understanding of music, like it would go back, backdate even all the songs I ever heard before, because understanding, what the chord structure was, I could play all these songs from my memories, just knowing how the chords work. So it's kind of like a cheat code. It's like language. It's like once you understand it, what words mean, and you can like bring your own words, and when you hear certain phrases, you can identify it. So like sometimes there would be songs I had never played before, but I could play them accurate because of my understanding of the music accompanying the memories of the song. So even now, it's, there's a lot of new songs, but in most churches like that we play in, it's like they don't really sing that many new songs versus songs that we know like hymns and things like that, because we had a conversation earlier, they will never go away. It's like you can't bury it. It's light. It's just always gonna shine. You try to cover it up. It's like just peeping through the hole. Like here I am. So that's kind of like what it is now. If you didn't come from that culture, trying to come into church culture to learn, it would take some time and some serious dedication, to kind of learn. But again, there's like a basic kind of like chord structure. So it's like if I play, in theory we call it the one, and if I go to a chord, 9 times out of 10 it's going to a 5, to a 1, and then if you play hymns, and then it's going what moves you did on what songs, your vocabulary, it multiplies. So that's what kind of like makes it, easy. Yeah.
Oh, and I was gonna ask, how well can a Hammond organ imitate a pipe organ in a church or classical?
Terrible. But I know some organists, one named Derek Jackson out of Memphis, Tennessee, and because he was classically trained, like he kind of really understands like the nuances of it. So. That's things he kind of showed me. That was kind of like the thing. So they do like these processionals, So
It's close.
if you kind of learn how to manipulate it, and then the two. So yeah.
So what about people like Richard Smallwood, Fred Hammond? Are they still right in that same thing we were just talking about?
So
you know one song, 40 of them.
So with Richard Smallwood, absolutely not. Fred Hammond, yes. But Richard Smallwood is his music encompasses it encompasses so much of the classical. Classical, is where we get complex, and it's funny because you asked that question. Most modern music, pop music, is is very repetitive. You can make a 2-bar loop, and that might be the whole song with like some elements or breakdowns, and that's cool. I don't knock it. But, if I'm in a crowd of 100, I'm probably the one guy sitting down. And it's nice, but everybody's like dancing. But because of the musicality, if I hear something like Richard Smallwood that has, these tonal characters to it and harmonies, that's what moves me. But then the rest of my friends are probably asleep. So, that's just kind of like the dynamic, different strokes for different folks. But Fred Hammond's music is more modern. So his approach is kind of more typical to what I'm talking about. He has a song like, and that's another song. So I think that's go back on the phone against me, shall prosper, give more. And then we have a song, oh, whatever you do in the season, don't do it without me. Same chord, don't do it without me. And then it won't always be like this. Same chord, just in different patterns. You see what I mean? Yeah. So that's why I'm like, at that rate, if you learn one, you multiply, the vocabulary of songs because they're all, in that same vein. And literally those 3 songs are actually in that same key.
I got a cheat code for all of you guys.
Come on, cheat code.
So, if anybody here has Apple Music, YouTube Music, you really want to hear changes, all the changes that he's playing, and really hear him like in a big production, he actually has music out.
Oh yeah.
So you can go to David Jackson and just really listen and be able to break down because he plays everything on the project. No, literally, bass, guitar, keys, organ, drums, and sing. So you get to hear one person be like a prince and a musical genius in a sense, and you get to hear how he layer himself, So, yeah.
That was a compliment. You referred to the prince. The ball dead and the lighting. But anyway.
Same thing.
Okay. Thank you. I do have music out. You get most of it is probably on YouTube as well, like you said. So okay, we're right at it. I'm gonna play one more song.
What's the name first? What's the name of your album?
I have an album on Apple Music called One Accord. So if you look up David Jackson, One Accord, that one, it kind of encompasses both. as he said, I play multiple instruments. I mainly play keyboards, and so on that one I was able to, call some people to help me out that really wanted to be a part of it. And so I was able to demo all the songs on the instruments, and then send it to people that we all look up to. There's like a keyboard player named Kevin Bond. He's a multi-platinum gospel producer, multi-Grammy award-winning music producer and songwriter, and he played piano on the record. There's another drummer that we all love, and Calvin Rogers, again, another multi-Grammy winning musician who played drums. There's Jonathan DuBose, a multi-Grammy winning guitar player that played. So, just very fortunate to have some people that wanted to be a part, and help me, do that project. And so,
don't forget David's songs, praise.
And there's another song, there's another album where I play. It's kind of a more subtle approach. It's called David's Songs of Praise. It was a church service where they had prayer for the duration of the service, and so because it was silent, I got to play songs while they prayed. Well, fortunately for me, the sound engineer hit record, and that came to be. It was 2 days, and so we put both days up with just the instrumental music, and I definitely thought people were going to fall asleep listening to it, but apparently that's a good thing. So if you just kind of want to mellow out, hear some nice melodies and things like that. David's Songs of Praise, volumes 1 and 2. Shameless plug.
Great.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna play one more. This, was there any more questions before I do that? I gotta shout out Sandra Manning is in here. She snuck in. She's right here. She's hiding out. She's one of the most phenomenal organists, especially in this area. So I'm very honored. She's always been a big sister and a very supportive and encouraging person in my life, just in general. So I don't take it lightly that you snuck in early. Y'all can give her another round of applause. Seriously, that's music royalty just hanging out with us right now. I was a tad nervous when I started walking. I was like, this is like, anyway. So I'm grateful. I turned a little bit red though. It was like, okay. Also, everything I was saying about the organ, I was like darting my eyes at her to see if I was right or wrong. It was really cool. Because again, like music royalty, so definitely appreciate it. But yeah, was that all the questions? Because I'm gonna play one more song and we gotta cut. I mean, we can talk after, but we gotta be done. Cool, I'm gonna play. So this song is called Praise Him, Jesus, blessed Savior. He's worthy to be praised. If you go to the church down the street, they might say, you're worthy to be praised. And, it's open to interpretation. And I'm going to play this one again in F sharp or G flat. But if you're from where I'm from, you better say F sharp. You say G flat, and the question mark come on every face. All right? So I like it because this one, it never has a setup. Nobody does this song it prefaces it. There's no intro. A lot of times you just get praise him. Everybody. Thank you, everyone.
One more time, make some noise for David Jackson. Thank you to the Jazz School. Thank you, Dante. Thank you, Sue, for coming to that incredible master class last month. We have 2 more left, so see you guys next month.